100 people gathered at the Stoddard Place Apartments Monday night. Many were in tears. Some said they were family members of the deceased, many not wanting to talk. A man shot and killed a woman and then turned the gun on himself.
An adult male was engaged in an argument with an adult female. He reportedly took a gun and he fired at the adult female before turning the gun on himself.
An uncle of the female victim said the couple lived together at the complex and had a 4-month-old baby. He says they had been together for over a year.
I saw both of them yesterday.
How did they seem? They seem okay?
Seem okay, happy, jolly, laughing, as usual, as always.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a truly horrifying case that will leave you questioning how far obsession and control can go. This story involves a simple Facebook post, just a few words that changed everything. Jacavia Simmons, a 20-year-old mother, decided to make a bold move to reclaim her independence. But what was meant to be a routine update became the spark for a deadly tragedy. This wasn't just a breakup, it was a tragic turning point, leading to a shocking murder-suicide. What drove this young mother's partner, Tradarius Gray, to take such a violent step after something as seemingly insignificant as a Facebook status change? Stay tuned as we break down the chilling details of what happened on that fateful day. And, if you want to support the channel and stay updated with our latest true crime stories, make sure to subscribe and stay active. Your support means the world, and I'd be super grateful for that. On May 16, 2022, in the quiet coastal city of Pensacola, Florida, a 20-year-old mother named Jacavia Simmons made a simple decision that would tragically end her life. Like many of us do, she took to social media to make an important change, updating her Facebook relationship status. For Jacavia, this wasn't just a post. It was a declaration of independence, a moment where she publicly acknowledged that her relationship with Tradarius Gray, the father of her child, was over. But little did she know, this small digital act would trigger a deadly chain of events. In the hours that followed, a quiet apartment complex would be rocked by the sounds of gunfire. What started as an innocent update on Facebook became the catalyst for a tragedy that would take the life of a young mother, leave an infant orphaned, and forever change a community. What drove a man to commit such a horrific act in the wake of a breakup? How did control, jealousy, and obsession twist what could have been a normal separation into something much darker? This is a heartbreaking story of domestic violence, control, and the intersection of social media and real-world consequences. Today, we'll explore the chilling events that led to the murder-suicide of Jacavia Simmons and Tradarius Gray, and the psychological dynamics that fueled such a tragic end. So, let's dive into the details of a story that serves as both a warning and a call to action about the dangers of toxic relationships. Jacavia Simmons was just 20 years old, but she was already beginning to carve out a new life for herself. She had recently become a mother, welcoming a beautiful baby girl who quickly became the center of her world. But she wasn't just a mother, Jacavia was a young woman full of potential, eager to build a life on her own terms. She had moved into her own apartment, marking a significant step toward independence. A place to call her own, away from the past, away from the relationship she was slowly growing apart from. Her social media was filled with photos, pictures of a smiling young mother holding her newborn, snapshots of what seemed like the start of a bright future. To the outside world, it looked like everything was falling into place. Friends saw her as happy, optimistic, and someone who had a lot to look forward to. But as the days went on, those seemingly perfect moments on Instagram and Facebook were starting to tell a different story. Behind the smiles, there were cracks. The tension in her relationship with Tradarius Gray, the father of her child, had been building for a while. What appeared to be a happy family on the surface was starting to unravel. Subtle posts, cryptic words, and unspoken frustration hinted that the reality of their relationship was far from the fairy tale many might have assumed. Jacavia had begun to pull away. It wasn't just about the usual relationship problems, there were deeper, darker issues at play. The controlling behavior from Tradarius was becoming more evident. He began questioning her every move, keeping tabs on her phone, and isolating her from friends. She was a mother trying to navigate a toxic relationship, all while trying to create a future for herself and her daughter. Yet, as she took these steps toward freedom, she had no idea that the very thing she thought would liberate her, the act of asserting her independence, would spark a violent and tragic end. Jacavia had been in a year-long relationship with Tradarius Gray, the father of her child. To anyone on the outside, they appeared to be the perfect couple. Photos from their baby shower showed them smiling together, full of joy and excitement for the life they were about to start as parents. They looked like a family, one that was about to take the next big step in their lives. But what many didn't see were the subtle, insidious signs of control and manipulation that had been growing behind the scenes. Tradarius, once charming and attentive, began to show his darker side. Over time, his behavior shifted from caring to controlling. He started to monitor Jacavia's phone, obsessively checking her messages and social media, questioning her about every interaction. What seemed like simple concern for their relationship soon turned into something much more sinister. Friends and family members began noticing the change. Jacavia, who had always been outgoing and social, became more withdrawn. She was no longer the same carefree woman who posted vibrant photos of herself and her baby online. Instead, she was increasingly isolated, cut off from her support network, unable to freely communicate with friends or family. Tradarius, ever the presence in her life, began making subtle threats and exerting more control, often checking her whereabouts, questioning who she was with, and demanding to know why she was out without him. It was clear to those closest to Jacavia that something was off. While she had once been full of life, her posts started to reflect the growing tension in her relationship. There were no longer carefree updates or happy family moments. Instead, she posted cryptic messages, signaling her frustration, confusion, and exhaustion. Despite the love she had for her child and the hope she once had for her relationship, Jacavia began to realize that the relationship was taking more from her than it was giving. She was no longer just a partner, she had become a possession, a person to be controlled rather than loved. The signs were there, but they were easy to overlook. To the casual observer, they were just ordinary relationship struggles. But as the weeks went by, the controlling behaviors escalated, and Jacavia knew she needed to make a change. As the relationship between Jacavia and Tradarius continued to deteriorate, the cracks that had once been hidden beneath the surface began to show more clearly. Jacavia's social media, once a place of joy and celebration, became a silent cry for help. The carefree posts that had once filled her feeds were replaced by subtle, but powerful, signals of the emotional toll the relationship was taking on her. Her posts grew darker, more cryptic. She began to express her frustration and exhaustion through indirect words and phrases, hinting at her inner turmoil without directly addressing the issues she was facing. Weak as hell, she wrote one day, capturing a moment of vulnerability that spoke volumes about how drained she was by the ongoing tension. Another post read, "I am dead," a haunting reflection of just how emotionally overwhelmed she had become. What should have been a normal sign of someone seeking independence and contemplating a life change was seen through a completely different lens by Tradarius. To him, these posts were not signs of someone trying to break free, but of someone betraying him. He viewed them as direct attacks, insults even, rather than expressions of pain or frustration. Every word that didn't fit into his narrative of control was seen as a challenge to his authority, a personal affront. Jacavia wasn't just sharing her thoughts, she was reaching out for validation, trying to process her own feelings in a world that was becoming increasingly suffocating. Her posts were indirect cries for help, but because they were masked in frustration and coded language, those who might have been able to intervene didn't fully recognize the danger she was in. Meanwhile, Tradarius's reactions grew more intense. As Jacavia posted more about her exhaustion, his response wasn't one of concern or care, it was one of anger and possessiveness. The control, which had been there all along, tightened even further. Jacavia, though trapped in her own struggle, was still trying to cling to some sense of self, posting online as if the world could understand, or at least, could give her an outlet. The warning signs of an abusive relationship often start small. They can be dismissed as nothing more than the ups and downs of a relationship. But as Jacavia's social media posts began to reflect the depth of her emotional exhaustion, the lines between concern and control started to blur for Tradarius. And what might have been a cry for help became the catalyst for the violence that would soon follow. On May 16, 2022, Jacavia made a decision that would change the course of her life forever. Like many people navigating the end of a relationship, she took to Facebook, a platform that, for better or worse, had become a way to share personal milestones and struggles with the world. With a few simple keystrokes, she updated her relationship status from "in a relationship" to "single." To Jacavia, this wasn't a rash decision, it was a step toward reclaiming her independence. It was a public declaration that her relationship with Tradarius had reached its breaking point. It marked the end of her struggle to hold on to something that was no longer serving her, a way to show herself and the world that she was ready to move on, to begin a new chapter as a mother, free from the toxic grip of a controlling partner. But for Tradarius, that one simple post felt like something entirely different. It wasn't just a breakup, it was a humiliation. A public rejection. To him, Jacavia wasn't just another person making a personal decision to move on, she was his possession, someone who belonged to him, and that Facebook status felt like a slap to his pride. The very public nature of the breakup, where everyone could see that she was moving on, pushed him into a frenzy. It wasn't just about losing her, it was about the world knowing he'd lost control. In less than 3 hours after Jacavia hit post, the tone of the day shifted drastically. Tradarius began calling her repeatedly, sending text after text, his messages ranging from confusion to anger. What started as a desperate attempt to understand why she'd made the post quickly morphed into an obsessive demand for answers. His humiliation turned into rage. Jacavia, already emotionally worn out from months of tension, tried to defuse the situation, reassuring him that they could talk later. But the more she tried to distance herself, the more desperate and controlling his responses became. By mid-afternoon, Jacavia had reached out to a close friend, telling them that Tradarius was losing it over the Facebook post. She didn't think he would react this way, but she was concerned. Her friend offered to come over for support, but Jacavia, believing that the situation might calm down, declined. She didn't know just how quickly things were spiraling. As Tradarius's emotional state grew more erratic, his actions became more unpredictable. It was no longer just about trying to fix their relationship, it was about him trying to reassert control over Jacavia, a desperate attempt to undo the public humiliation he felt. And, as we would later find out, when someone can no longer control their partner, the consequences can be devastating. Tradarius, consumed by a mixture of anger and humiliation, couldn't let go of what had just happened. His frustration and obsession with control pushed him to the brink. In a fit of rage, he got into his car and drove to Jacavia's apartment. His mind was fixated on one thing, confronting her, demanding answers, and, more dangerously, forcing her to take back what she had done. For him, this wasn't just a breakup. It was an affront to his pride, and the only way he saw to regain control was through violence. Neighbors later described the scene that followed as terrifyingly familiar, an all-too-common pattern in toxic, controlling relationships. Raised voices filled the air as Tradarius arrived at Jacavia's apartment. His anger was unmistakable. The tension in the air was palpable, as the confrontation quickly escalated from an argument to something much darker. Jacavia, knowing the pattern all too well, likely pleaded with him, trying to calm the situation down, but it was clear the anger and humiliation had clouded his judgment completely. The argument reached a breaking point. At around 5:20 p.m., neighbors heard the first gunshot, a sound that shattered the fragile calm of the apartment complex. It was followed by another shot, and then another, until 5 shots rang out in quick succession. Each shot struck Jacavia, leaving her no chance to escape the violence that had overtaken the apartment. The final shot was fired shortly after, as Tradarius, consumed by his need for control and unable to face the reality of what he had just done, turned the gun on himself. In a matter of seconds, a life full of potential, Jacavia's life, was violently extinguished. The only survivor was their 4-month-old daughter. Alone in the apartment, she was left crying, unaware of the horror that had just unfolded. Despite the trauma, she was miraculously unharmed physically, but emotionally scarred in ways no one could understand at that moment. The scene in the apartment was one of unimaginable tragedy, bloodshed in a place that had once been a symbol of Jacavia's new beginning, now a scene of devastation. As the minutes passed, neighbors, alarmed by the sounds of gunfire, began to call 911. When law enforcement arrived at the apartment just minutes later, they were met with a scene that would haunt them. Jacavia was lying lifeless in the living room, struck by 5 bullets at close range. Tradarius was found nearby, a self-inflicted gunshot wound ending his life. And the baby, a symbol of innocence, was found in her swing, crying, alone, but physically unharmed. What should have been an evening of peace, a moment of hope for Jacavia and her daughter, turned into a nightmare no one could have predicted. Following the tragic events at Stoddard Place Apartments, the investigation into Jacavia's murder and Tradarius's suicide began immediately. The authorities quickly discovered that Tradarius's criminal history was not just troubling, it was a clear warning sign. Just weeks before the murder, Tradarius had been arrested for aggravated assault. This charge was part of a pattern of troubling behavior that had gone largely unnoticed by many of the people around him. Despite his history, he still had access to a firearm, a devastating oversight in a system that's supposed to prevent dangerous individuals from obtaining weapons. As investigators pieced together the events leading up to the shooting, they discovered a series of chilling text messages between Jacavia and Tradarius. These messages, which had escalated over the course of the day, painted a picture of a man spiraling out of control, angry, hurt, and unable to accept the end of the relationship. Jacavia's attempts to calm him only seemed to fuel his rage. It became clear that, for Tradarius, the breakup wasn't just an emotional blow, it was an attack on his identity, his sense of control. And, tragically, his response was to lash out in violence. Jacavia's family was in complete shock. Just the day before the murder, they had seen the couple laughing and seemingly happy. Her uncle, Corey Richardson, recalled their last interaction. They seemed okay, happy, jolly, laughing as usual, he said, his words filled with disbelief and heartbreak. To those close to Jacavia, the sudden violence was incomprehensible. They couldn't understand how something that appeared so normal on the outside could escalate so quickly into something so deadly. The aftermath of the tragedy rippled through the community. Local reporters and neighbors, who had watched the young family from a distance, were left struggling to make sense of it all. How could a relationship that appeared so stable, so full of promise, end in such violence? The community was left grappling with the loss, particularly for Jacavia's infant daughter, who, at just 4 months old, was now left without both of her parents. The sheer senselessness of the crime left everyone shaken. In the days that followed, the local community came together to support Jacavia's daughter. A GoFundMe campaign was set up, raising thousands of dollars for her future. Local businesses also contributed, helping to create a trust fund for her education and ensuring that she would have a chance at a future, despite the horrific tragedy that had taken everything from her. For Jacavia's family, the pain of losing her was compounded by the questions that would forever haunt them. Could they have seen the signs earlier? Could they have intervened before it was too late? There was no simple answer, just a deep, unshakable grief. Jacavia's uncle, fighting back tears, spoke about how they never saw the danger coming. "You think you know people, you think you see something like this coming, but we didn't see it. How did we not see it?" His words reflected the deep confusion and sorrow felt by everyone who had known Jacavia. The tragedy also served as a grim reminder of the dangers of controlling, possessive relationships and the stark reality of how quickly they can escalate into violence. For many, Jacavia's death was a wake-up call, an urgent plea to recognize the warning signs of domestic violence before it's too late. Tradarius's response wasn't just about the breakup, it was about control. For someone with possessive tendencies, rejection can feel like an attack on their identity. Social media, by making breakups public, amplified these emotions. To Tradarius, Jacavia's Facebook post wasn't just an end to their relationship, it was a public humiliation. The personal rejection felt like a loss of control, and that's when the violence erupted. This tragedy highlights how social media can amplify dangerous emotions in relationships. A simple Facebook update triggered violent behavior in a relationship marked by control and obsession. When love becomes possession, it can lead to devastating consequences. If you or someone you know is facing control, recognizing the warning signs and seeking help is crucial. Jacavia Simmons's story is more than just a tragic loss, it's a stark reminder that domestic violence doesn't always appear as violent acts right away. It often starts with small, overlooked warning signs, isolating behavior, controlling actions, or subtle emotional manipulation, that can grow into something much darker. Jacavia's life ended far too soon, but her story serves as a wake-up call for all of us. It's crucial to recognize the difference between healthy relationships and those marked by control and possessiveness. This tragedy reminds us that we need to be vigilant. If you notice a friend or loved one in a relationship that seems controlling or unsafe, speak up. Even the smallest act of intervention could make all the difference. We can't afford to ignore the red flags or wait until it's too late. Domestic violence often escalates in secrecy, but we have the power to break the silence. If you or someone you know is in an abusive or controlling relationship, please don't wait for things to get worse. There are resources available, help is out there, and you are not alone. Whether it's a helpline, support group, or even just a conversation with someone you trust, reaching out can be the first step toward safety. Let's continue to raise awareness and create communities where control, manipulation, and violence are no longer tolerated. Together, we can build a future where no one has to live in fear of their partner's anger or control. Speak up. Be the support someone might desperately need. If you found Jacavia's story important and want to help raise awareness, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us grow and reach more people with these vital stories. The more we share, the more lives we can impact. Thank you for being part of this journey.